Welcome to the year-end, first of the year, annual lift truck operator certification class. This will be taking place in December in Atlanta and in January at all other locations. This is an annual class that Spectra requires. Despite the fact that OSHA requires recertification every 3 years, Spectra chooses to do this annually. That achieves three things for us. One, we don't have to keep up with so-and-so expires in June of 2020. This operator expires in August of 2021. This operator expires in February of 2019. This way, if everybody's recertified annually, no one will ever lose their certification due to the 3-year mark. Secondly, it allows us to cover pertinent things that have been occurring over the past year regarding forklift concerns. And lastly, it allows us to bring attention to safe forklift operation on an annual basis, which I think is at a minimum a good rule of thumb. Please remember the class rules. Please silence your cell phones. Please avoid phone calls. If you start to nod off, please step to the back of the room. You should know where your restroom facilities are at. Hold any questions until the moderator in your location asks for questions. And please avoid private conversations during the class. They are distracting to the person you're talking to and the person next to you. Alright, again, we're only going to hit highlights. This will not be a comprehensive recertification class. This will be a highlighted class, just like last year's class and next year's class will be. We're going to hit the highlights and the concerns. First, I want to ask you, what do you suppose the number one concern that is brought to my attention on an annual basis, a regular basis, sometimes a daily or weekly basis is regarding lift operators? If you said speed, you are absolutely correct, and I would imagine most of you did. It was my experience here in Atlanta that everyone knew that speed was the number one concern. That concerns me in and of itself, that lift operators know that they're driving too fast. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. And what would you suppose the second most common concern is that comes to my attention regarding lift operators? If you said sounding your horn, you are absolutely correct. I get many complaints about forklift drivers not properly using their horns at intersections, congested areas, and I get that almost as much as I get complaints about forklifts driving too fast. You need to remember, you not only should be sounding your horn when you are in congested areas and coming around blind intersections, but also when you're passing through doorways, backing out of trailers, and like I said, anytime you're driving past open aisles that people could come out of, just need to be very consciously aware of the fact that just because you are driving a big green or big ugly yellow piece of equipment that's putting off a stinky emission, that everybody sees you and is concerned about their safety when they're around you. Use your horn to make sure you have their attention. We live in a very distracted culture, and we need to go out of our way to make sure everyone knows where we are with a piece of equipment that rarely causes minor injuries when it injured someone, but typically causes very serious injuries when injuries occur from forklifts. Alright, so do you agree with these conclusions? I have what I kind of call the big three rules, and no speeding or slowing down, and no not using your horn adequately are definitely number one and number two. And let me say, with horn use also, it's not necessarily about using your horn more, but it's about using your horn more appropriately. So, do you agree with these concerns? And if you do, as a lift operator, that should be a concern to all of us, that as lift operators, we know that we're going too fast. We know that we're not sounding our horn adequately. So the question begs to be asked, why do you think lift drivers drive too fast? Why do we drive too fast? Why do we not use our horns as we should? The most common consensus that I got, again, in my live classes here in Atlanta was that we're in too big of a hurry. We get comfortable. We get careless. We're not in the habit of doing what is safe. One person was candid enough, a manager was candid enough to say that one reason they don't use their horn as often as they should is because they're confident that there's no one in their work area when they're using their lift. Choosing to say, well, there's nobody in this trailer, so I don't need to use my horn coming in or backing out of it. So, we need to be honest with ourselves. That was a good, candid response. The fact is, we don't know when someone is going to walk in our area or walk in front of us or walk around a blind intersection. So we have to make contingency using our horns, slowing down for that. Being in a hurry. I think everybody agrees we feel pressure to get it done, hurry up and get it done. Some of us put pressure on ourselves. We talked about this last month a little bit, actually, about slowing down and taking our time, using care and caution. We just can't get in such a hurry that we neglect safe behaviors. Not because it's the rule, but because we want to stay safe. Again, I can't say it enough. The rules are not there just because. The rules are rules because somebody got hurt and they said, wow, to prevent this from happening, we're going to need to create a rule that establishes a safe way to do it. So we need to slow down. Whatever it is that has you feeling like you have to work as fast as you are if you are avoiding common safety practices in the process, needs to be dealt with so that we can do our job safely. You will never hear from this safety office the statement that safety can be neglected for speed, for rushing, for hurrying up and getting it done. And I would dare say that if rushing to get it done seems justifiable to you, then I would bet you we could analyze your day and find times in your day where you could eliminate other slowdowns and be a little better with your time management, maybe a little less break time or conversation time, and make up for that. But most of us out there are hourly, so I don't know. Usually we say we want to work a lot of hours so we can make a lot of money, but then we want to hurry up and get it done so we can go home early. But the bottom line is, if you get injured, you're not going home early. You're going to go home late. So let's slow down and use caution and get in the habit of using our horns. Now, with that said, let's talk about the third big rule, if you will, round out the top three big rules by talking about seatbelt use. This is another common complaint, concern that is brought to my attention, that this rule is not being followed, and that is that we are not properly, adequately, and regularly in the habit of wearing our seatbelts. It's easy enough to say that one of the most important reasons for wearing our seatbelt is because it's the law. I would disagree. I don't think that's the most important reason. It's a good reason, but it's not the most important reason. The most important reason is because it's a lifesaver. Forklift accidents rarely injure forklift accidents most often kill. So particularly if it's a tip over. And if your seatbelt is not on and you are not secured in your seat and your forklift tips over, the results will be tragic. It won't be game interrupted, it will be game over. It is critical that you wear your seatbelt at all times. If you're like, but I'm on and off my lift, I'm on and off my lift, I'm on and off so much I just don't have time. You don't have time to not put your seatbelt on your forklift. The reality is, it should be a habit. Wearing your seatbelt should be such a habit, and a good habit, that it's not a factor if you're on and off a lot, because you're just in the habit of doing it. What does it take? A second? 2 seconds maybe? If losing 2 seconds to putting your seatbelt on several times throughout the course of the day prevents you from getting your job done on time, we have other problems than seatbelt. The fact is, we all have a seatbelt habit. The problem is, many of us are in the habit of not wearing our seatbelts. So get in the habit of wearing your seatbelt. Just put it on every time you get on your lift. All right, we're going to jump now over and talk about stability. There's 2 aspects of stability that I want to address: load stability and stack stability. We'll spend most of our time talking about stable stacking or stable stacks. First, we will make mention of stable loads. It is critically important that when you pick up a load of product, before you pick it up, you ensure that the load is stable, that it's secure, that it can safely be handled. I found this picture of some falling boxes. These might be very lightweight boxes. The reality is, most of what we handle at Spectra is not lightweight. And if you pick up an unstable load with your forklift and you hit a coil separator or a piece of pallet or even a crack or a divot in the concrete, it could cause an unstable load to easily fall off your forks. And most of what we carry at Spectra will not be a minor accident if it falls off the forks, but could be a much more significant accident. So ensure that your load is stable. All right, stable stacks. As you can see here from this stack of quarters, this is a very unstable stack. One of the challenges that we face at Spectra is that the majority of material that we stack is by nature top heavy. Remember, something's top heavy when it's taller than it is wide. So a stack of gutter coil, even in the coating areas, stacks of master coils. If the stack is taller than the base of it is wide, it is top heavy. So if you've got a 2 foot wide coil on a 2 foot wide skid and you stack it 4 foot tall, it's top heavy. 8 foot tall, it's very top heavy. 16 foot tall, it's a disaster waiting to happen. And you all know that we have 8 to 10 foot tall stacks of coil. So like these quarters, when a stack is not stable, it is more of a hazard than just everyday stacks of coil. So let's look here at some examples. You can see here some serious stability issues with coil stacking. With the picture on your far left, you'll see a coil stacked on top of some coils, and to the far right of the runner on the skid, you can see it's just barely on top of the coils beneath it. This is an accident waiting to happen. Top center, you'll notice 2 coils that have somehow been knocked almost completely off the skid, making them very unstable. And then on the far top right, if you look carefully, you'll notice that the top coils are ridiculously out of balance, unstable, non-centered on the coils below them. Now, if something is top heavy, there is a very possible chance that it's going to fall if it is struck by a forklift or some other piece of moving equipment. But if that stack is unstable, how much more likely is it to fall? So with that in mind, we've got to remember that an unstable stack is a recipe for an accident to occur. I mean, if most of you are honest, you will admit that you have bumped into things before. You have struck coils, stacks of boxes, racks. We've all done it. It happens. But heaven help us if you bump into or strike an unstable top-heavy stack and someone is standing nearby. That stack goes down with anywhere from 700 to 1,100 pounds of gutter coil on it. It's not going to just bruise their toe. It could break 2 legs. It could kill them. So it is critical that we take the time to ensure that our coil stacks are stable, that any unstable stacks are addressed and corrected immediately. One of the best ways to prevent unstable stacks from occurring in the first place is to stack one skid at a time. I know this isn't a popular policy, procedure, doesn't even seem very practical, but the reality is putting safety first is going to require stacking one skid at a time. You can transport as many as you can stably carry, remembering they're top heavy. So I would not recommend carrying 4 skids of gutter coil on a forklift, even though conceivably you could, because they're going to be very top heavy and very dangerous. But if you do carry 2 single stacks of gutter coil, you can do that from point A to point B. But when it's time to stack them in inventory, you need to stack them one at a time to ensure the greatest chance for stability in the stack. Alright, your favorite topic and mine, pre-shift lift inspections. We've got the OSHA regulation here from 29 CFR 1910.178Q7, which tells us that industrial trucks shall be examined before being placed into service and shall not be placed into service if the examination shows any condition adversely affecting the safety of the vehicle. Such examination shall be made at least daily. Where industrial trucks are used on a round-the-clock basis, they shall be examined after each shift, which is the equivalent to before every shift. Defects, when found, shall be immediately reported and corrected. Now, we need to be doing pre-shift inspections, and honestly, company-wide, we do not do a good job of that. Pre-shift inspections are not just the law. Yes, OSHA requires them, and we can be fined if we don't have 6 months worth of inspections available for every lift truck that we have in operation. But the most important reason for doing a lift truck inspection is your safety. Unsafe trucks are dangerous trucks, and dangerous trucks hurt people. We also have major cost savings that can be achieved by consistently doing our pre-shift inspections and reporting concerns to maintenance. Remember, when you do your inspection and save a copy of it online for me to review remotely, you also, if there is a defect or a concern, you need to print out a copy of that and get it to your supervisor, manager, or maintenance personnel right away. Parking brake. Not going to say a lot about parking brake. I just want to remind you the importance of using them. Goes back to the pre-shift inspection. If you find that it is not as tight as it should be to provide for safety, you need to definitely report that to maintenance and get your parking brake or your emergency brake tightened up so that you can depend on it to keep your forklift still if a problem occurs when it's not occupied. Alright, changing out propane tanks. I'm going to spend a minute on this. Very important. I told the classes in Atlanta, do not be deceived by that picture on the left. They're using gloves that are not leather. we require the use of leather gloves when you're changing out your propane tanks, as well as safety glasses, safety goggles, or prescription safety glasses must be worn. You need to protect your skin, your hands, and your eyes when you're handling and changing propane. The big three rules, my apologies. The 8 steps to changing out propane tanks are listed here. We're going to go through them real quick. The first 3, if you run your propane tank empty, the first 3 won't apply to you. Of course, number 3 will, but not the stalled portion. But if for some chance, let's say you're running your shift that day and you realize you don't have, you're not going to have too many breaks during the day, and you've only got a quarter of a tank of propane. You have a slowdown about an hour into your shift, and you're like, I'm going to go ahead and change my tank now while I can, before I get so busy that I don't have time. Now, keep in mind, if you do that, that tank needs to get used up if you have a facility wherein they simply swap tanks. Otherwise, we're going to give away that unused LP gas to the company, because we're going to pay for a full tank when they swap it, regardless of the fact that they're taking a tank that's a quarter full. So we do want to try in every circumstance possible to run the tanks empty, unless you have a pump and fill service with your propane company rather than a tank swap. With that said, if you are swapping it before it's empty, you need to shut the tank valve and let the engine stall. Crank it and let it stall, or let it stall from shutting the valve. Once it's stalled, you know that the supply line going to the engine is empty, and you can remove the supply line. When you put the new tank on, ensure the valve is closed. The problem that comes about here is sometimes when we stall our forklifts because they completely run out of propane, we don't think to close the valve because we know the tank's empty. Well, that's all well and good until the company comes out and fills the tanks, and then someone goes to put it on their lift, and the valve is open, and they get spray of extremely thermal cold burns from the propane because the valve was left open. So even if you run your tank empty, close the valve, and when you go to put a new tank on your forklift, make sure the valve is closed. Then be sure and line up the slot. You know the slot I'm talking about. There's a pin on the back of every forklift where the tank goes. Make sure that it is properly lined up with the pin so that the overflow relief valve is properly lined up away from the driver or any pedestrians. Attach the supply line and slowly open the valve. Now, I say slowly because forklift propane tanks have a mechanism built into them wherein if the propane flow is sudden and fast, there's a mechanism in there that will assume you've developed a leak and that it's depressurizing improperly, and that bladder will shut down and you won't be able to get gas flow. You're going to think that something's wrong, that the tank's defective, that the full tank's behaving as it's empty, but the reality is the mechanism is shut down and caused the flow to cease, and it takes about 5 minutes for that to reduce and reset. So open the valve slowly to prevent that from happening. Lastly, ensure the straps are securely holding the tank in place. Now, I know for most branches, if you're like Atlanta, your straps are in horrible condition. Maintenance personnel need to be paying attention to that. Plant managers, branch managers need to be talking with your forklift suppliers when they come out and do work on your lifts or PMs on your lifts, that those straps that hold the tank in place, the positioning straps and the securing straps, the metal straps that are on those tanks, need to be securely tightened and in place and held in place when the lift is in operation with the propane tank on the back of it. If you are unable to do that because the straps are bent or damaged, you need to get those straps replaced. It is a matter of safety. All right, we're going to move on and talk about mounting and dismounting. There's 3 aspects to this that I want us to discuss. 3-point touch or 3-point contact, slowing down, and paying attention. Okay, we need to always maintain a 3-point contact when you are getting on or off the lift. That simply means that 3 parts of your body should be stabilized between the ground and or the forklift at all times when mounting and dismounting. We'll look at a diagram in a minute and talk more about 3-point contact. We also need to slow down. These ninja moves on and off of forklifts are a recipe for an accident to occur. It's how people trip and fall. It's how knees get twisted, ankles get injured, shin splints occur, people fall down. We need to slow down when we're getting on and off of forklifts. The amount of time, again, that you're going to lose doing it properly is inconsequential in comparison to your overall responsibilities through the day. And lastly, pay attention to what you're doing. Pay attention to your shoelaces. Pay attention to the condition of the floor surrounding you. If it's slippery, if it's sweaty. Pay attention to your shoelaces if they're properly tied. Just general safety awareness. Pay attention to that when mounting and dismounting. The diagram I spoke of is shown here where you have 3-point contact. You have point 1 where the left hand is grabbing a bracket on the overhead safety cage. The right hand is likewise grabbing the back of the seat or the rear bar of the overhead safety compartment, and contact 3 is one of the feet going up onto the step onto the forklift. There is your 3 points of contact. You'll see some wrong examples over here. Top guy has 2-point contact because he is wanting to carry his lunch with him on board, it seems. And the third guy on bottom down there, he is doing some kind of levitation, elevation, ninja move to raise himself up on the lift and not looking at the lift and where he's headed, but looking at whoever is watching him. So we just need to slow down, pay attention, and maintain 3-point contact getting on and off of a lift truck for our own safety. All right, this is only going to apply to Atlanta and Florida. The rest of you will bear with us. It's a good resume builder for you to have this information. We have 2 types of lift trucks predominantly at Spectra. We have LPS trucks and we have LP trucks. LPS trucks will be marked with a large sign that says LPS. LP trucks will not have this marking. In all cases, you can look at the data plate underneath type of lift truck, and it will tell you if it's an LP or an LPS. Only LPS lift trucks should be used when handling or working near flammable materials. The S in LPS, as far as I know, stands for safety. The sparking equipment on the engine on an LPS lift truck has been encased as not to allow open air sparking. Starter, spark plugs, things of that nature have been placed in encasements so that the sparks cannot be generated and cause ignition of flammable materials that may be being handled or working with. So primarily Florida Paint Line, make sure that you are using an LPS truck whenever you are working around and or handling paint, paint thinners, solvents, oils, anything of that nature needs to be handled only with an LPS lift. An LP lift does create sparks, as all lifts do that are not LPS, and that can That can be a real deal breaker when it comes to a spill or other exposed fumes from flammable materials. So only use LPS lifts when handling or working near flammable materials. Alrighty. Alright, getting ready to wrap up here. I want us to take a look at care and caution, just a couple items, and then we're going to watch a video. Unfortunately, some of you are going to recognize the event that's seen in this video. We won't name any names, but we did have an incident with a forklift going off a dock at one of our locations, and we're going to talk about how care and caution could have possibly prevented that. First of all, though, I want to talk about eye contact. It's imperative that we make eye contact. As I said before, just because you're operating a piece of big ugly green or big ugly yellow or maybe even a big ugly red or gray piece of equipment and you're putting off a stinky CO2 emission does not mean that distracted people are going to notice you. So it's critical that forklift drivers, you make eye contact with pedestrians or other bystanders in your normal work areas or areas you're passing through. Do not assume that they see you or hear you or smell you. Make sure that you, if you have to go as far as to saying, hey, so-and-so, I'm backing up, or hey, so-and-so, I'm waiting for you to get past me so I can safely back up. Make verbal contact so that you can then make eye contact. Make sure that you have been acknowledged and that the pedestrian is safe before you back up. As a lift driver, you back up and hit somebody or drive and hit somebody, you're going to be at fault. Pedestrian, you're going to be laying in a hospital bed. That's small consolation to know that you weren't at fault if you got hit by a forklift when you're laying in a hospital bed. So let's go out of our way, pedestrians and lift drivers, to make eye contact with the lift operators in the work area. All right, second aspect of care and caution I want to talk about is foresight. For about 3 years now, I've been talking about having a what-if mentality, asking the questions, what if this were to happen? What could go wrong? And then we need to address those concerns before we proceed with the functions and job duties that we have. And foresight plays into that, plays into it heavily. The video you're going to see in a minute, as I understand it, there was an attempt being made to load a coil on the back of a truck. A leveling dock was in use. If you don't know what a leveling plate, if you don't know what a leveling plate or a leveling dock is, dock plate sits down between the concrete dock and the back of a truck. A leveling plate is actually built into the floor and has the ability to go above the floor and below the floor to try to level out the path for the forklift or the pallet jack into the back of the vehicle to load it. In the case of this upcoming video, my number one concern is foresight. If the questions had been asked, what if? A couple what ifs had been asked, this accident may not have occurred. An accident which, fortunately, very fortunately, no one was injured. So we've got a forklift loading what may have been, I don't know, a 3,000 or 4,000 pound coil, or attempting to load it in the back of a truck. For some reason there was trouble. We had about 3 individuals working on this load, a lift operator and 2 other personnel. At one point it became apparent that the coil could not be properly loaded onto the back of the truck as the truck was positioned. So it seems the lift operator set the parking brake, got off the lift truck, although it does seem that the coil was left in the air, not put down to the ground, and the forklift was left on the leveling plate. So when the truck pulled out to reposition itself, the following incident occurred. You can see the forklift roll right off the dock. If you look carefully, you'll be able to see the coil. You can see the coil is up in the air, hanging off the dock. See, the dock plate, leveling plate goes below the floor. So when the truck pulled out, the leveling plate dropped. Forklift with parking brake on or otherwise, because the dock plate fell down to the ground below level, gave the forklift momentum to roll forward, and the coil being up in the air also allowed momentum for it to roll and move forward. Had the foresight been used and the questions what if been asked, we might have lowered that coil to the ground, and it's not likely that even the momentum of the forklift would have been able to push the coil off the dock when the leveling plate fell forward. Additionally, if we had had foresight and said to ourselves, wow, let's don't leave the fork on the leveling plate, because when we move the truck forward, the leveling plate's going to fall. So I think there's at least two aspects of foresight that we were lacking in this incident, as well as just asking what if. What if the dock plate falls? What if the forklift rolls forward? There was somebody on the ground outside. They were down where that truck went. Fortunately, when the other employee ran and hollered, I think they must have heard that and ran themselves. Had there not been a third employee on the dock hollering, there's the very real possibility that someone standing down in the off the dock in the pit there could have been struck and killed by that forklift. So in my mind, this is a very important, very real, very contemporary example of how we must use foresight and ask what if regarding our actions with our forklifts and in general in the workplace for our own safety. One last look at it here.
For us.
This resulted in nearly $10,000 in losses, which is nothing compared to the loss of life that could have occurred. Alrighty, I'm going to give you all a chance. If you have any questions, you can pause the video at this point and ask your questions. Questions that can't be answered locally can be submitted to me in Atlanta. Once you've completed your time of question and answer, you can hit play again on the video and we will pick back up moving towards the evaluation. Alright, a few quick instructions before you start your evaluations. I will grade these in Atlanta. Local facilitators and managers do not attempt to grade these. You need an 80 to pass. It's 10 questions, means you can only miss 2. Not much excuse for missing any. We've covered all the information in this presentation. Personnel must complete their own evaluations. Independent assistance from any other employees, supervisors, or managers is prohibited. This is a federal recertification. And lastly, new certificates will be made available on the Internet Resource page by February 1st for download locally. All right, you can go ahead now and begin your evaluations and pause the video. You can replay the video or start playing the video again about 5 or 6 minutes once everyone's completed their evaluation. All right, well, thank you very much for attending our 2019 annual forklift recertification operator training. Have a great, safe 2019. Bye-bye.